Hey class, welcome to our group's presentation. We're group 8. We're covering chapter 6, which is the selection process. And our group members are Daniel, Connor, myself, and Max. First, I'm going to talk over the table of contents. So we have the chapter review, then we'll move on to case questions. After that is case summary. Then we have case answers. Then we have the audience questions. And lastly, we'll do the references. So earlier on in the semester, we talked about a TED talk with Regina Hartley that talked about why the perfect resume might not be the best hire. And she talked about two distinct categories, which are the silver spoon and the scrapper. The silver spoon usually has better schooling, usually comes from money, and looks perfect on paper when it comes to their resume. And it's quite obvious that they have the advantages in life to succeed. Then you have the scrapper who tends to job hop, probably went to public schools, usually did a bunch of odd jobs, and it's someone who had to fight tremendously to get to the same point where the silver spoon would be. So the question leading to that is, who would you hire? That's what Regina would ask. Then we have the steps in selection process. So first step is preliminary reception of applicants. So again, this is initial contact with the applicants. Um, More back in the day, you'd have walk-ins or write-ins with a letter of acknowledgement. But due to the use of technology and stuff, the first contact tends to be through a technological platform. Then we have applicant screening. So that's when you remove applicants who may not fit the mold that you're looking for. You also ensure applicants meet legal requirements. Then we have administration of employment tests. So these tests are usually personality tests, ability tests, knowledge tests, performance tests, and even computer interactive, such as an Excel test or something like that. Then you have employment interviews. So that's when you'll actually conduct the interview. Then you have realistic job previews. So that's when you show the candidate the type of work they're going to be a part of, the equipment they might have to use, and just generally the working conditions. It's always beneficial for the employer to kind of highlight the positive and the negatives for the job. So that kind of gets the employee or the future employee kind of know what they're getting themselves into. And this also tends to reduce and lower employee turnover. Then we have step 6, which is verification of references. So that's when you look through their work history, you talk to their reference letters, um, you also do background checks. Then we have step 7, which is contingent assessments. In this certain step, you talk about their medical records. Do they have a driver's license? And also certain health issues they might have. Drug tests, more or less, it really depends on the employer because it is found that might violate employee rights. And then we have state, which is the hiring process. This is where you actually kind of decide if you want to hire the employee. You look at the trade-offs and you also look at your selection process. Then we have types of interviews. So with interviews, they can either be group, they could be a panel interview, or they could be one-to-one face-to-face. There's two different styles involved. So there's unstructured interviews. So that's when it doesn't have very many planned questions. It's more of like a conversation. Then you have structured interviews, which is a predetermined set of questions. So they have a list ready to go. They already know what they're going to ask before. And this tends to improve reliability and validity over the traditional unstructured interviews. Types of structured interviews we have is behavior description interviews. So that's when you look at the future behavior of the potential employee. Then you have situational. So you focus on what situations might come while you're working for the job and how the applicant might respond to those certain situations. Then you have rapid question assessment. So that's when you ask them really fast questions that are kind of hard to kind of make them a little stressed out and then you have stages in the typical interview. So the first stage is interview preparation. So that's, again, they're not there yet. You're deciding what questions you're going to ask and just what you're looking for. Then you have creation of rapport. So that's when they come, you say, hi, hello, how are you? How's your day? You kind of loosen up the applicant, get them ready for the serious questions. Then you have information exchange. So that's when you exchange information and get the answers to the questions that you're looking for. And then you have termination of interview. So that's you end the interview, applicant goes home and you do your thing. Then it's evaluation of candidates. So that's when you actually decide if you like the person, if you want to hire them, and if they're fit for the role. So now I'm going to pass it on to Daniel, and he's going to talk about the case question.
Thank you, Connor. Before we dive into the case, let me go over the case questions. First, we have what are the selection process steps that WEC is using for the human resource manager position? Imagine that you're a consultant to WEC. Provide the company with a better selection process for the HR manager position. Thirdly, we have to counter lack of depth of the questions from Alex, develop 2 behavioral and situational interview questions that Alex or Selena could ask of an HR manager candidate. And finally, should Alex and Selena hire Rebecca? Now for the case summary. In this situation, we have 3 main players. First, we have Rebecca Ali, who is interviewing for the potential HR manager at WEC, but also already has a job at the head office of a major department store where she is very content. Next, we have Alex. Alex is the CEO of WEC and has a lot going on being in such a high position. And finally, we have Selena, who is the current HR specialist at WEC. For the situation, Rebecca was impressed as she looked around the lobby of WEC. The company seemed to be doing well from what she could notice from the lobby. She was glad she had come. When she was first contacted by Alex, the CEO, it took a moment before she remembered meeting him at the golf tournament a month prior. He had let her know that his company was looking for an HR manager and wanted to see if Rebecca would be interested in the position. Although Rebecca is pretty happy with her current job at the head office of a major department store, she thought it wouldn't hurt to hear Alex out. Alex enters the lobby and smiles towards Rebecca. They shake hands and Alex says, "It's so nice to see you again. Thank you for coming. Let me give you a tour of the office." As they walk through the building, Alex explained the different departments and the type of projects they work on. Rebecca wasn't fully able to grasp what services they offered, but nodded politely as he talked. Around a half an hour later, they made their way to Alex's office. As they both sit down, Alex begins by saying, "We do have an HR specialist, but I think we need someone more like you, a person who can take charge of the people issues." Rebecca responds with her career path and how she has seen it all. Alex says, "That's what I thought. Do you think you can handle being an HR manager here?" Rebecca replies, "I'm sure I could, but I have never hit a problem I couldn't handle. But I was wondering if you could have a job description that I could see." Alex began to shuffle papers on his desk and says, "I know I have one somewhere. I asked Charlotte to draw one up earlier. Oh, wait, here it is," and hands the piece of paper over to Rebecca. She noticed that it was very brief and noted that the HR manager would be in charge of developing and implementing policies and procedures for recruitment and selection, performance management, health and safety, compensation, reward system, training, and development of HR planning and employee relations. Rebecca was not sure what to say. She did not have experience in developing policies in so many areas. While she was indeed an HR manager before, she mainly focused on recruiting and hiring activities for the department store. Just then, Selena enters the room and says, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Alex says, "Of course not. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me introduce you to Rebecca. She's the person I was telling you so much about." Selena then asks how the interview's going so far. Alex replies, "It's going great. I showed her around, gave her a copy of the job description, and now that you're here, I can start asking some of the tough questions." Reading from a sheet he had prepared, he asked Rebecca a couple of questions, including, what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses? Why are you interested in working for WEC? What would a perfect day be like for you? And if you could have one superpower, what would it be? Selena took careful notes of Rebecca's answers. Selena then addresses Rebecca and says, "I noticed on your resume that you have only worked for one company since you finished college. What do you think the main difference will be between a retail and a software firm?" Rebecca mulled over the question. She had a feeling Selena would be harder to impress than Alex. Finally, Rebecca replies, "I'm sure there will be differences, but people are people. At the end of the day, they really all want the same thing." Alex smiles and nods. He says, "That's very true. Excellent point, Rebecca. It's going to be great to have a real people expert teaching us about this stuff." 20 minutes later, Selena had finished her questions, and Rebecca had promised to send them a list of 3 references. As Rebecca walked out of the lobby toward her car, she was feeling very pleased with how the meeting had gone. She thought to herself, "Wow, I think I'm going to have a new job. This is amazing." Now I'm going to hand it off to Max, who's going to be answering the questions.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So now for the questions, the discussion questions. With question 1, what are the selection process steps that WC is using for the HR manager position? As Connor explained earlier, there's usually 8 steps in the hiring process, and we see now that they only completed 4 of them. So the step 1, the recruitment of applicants. As many organizations have moved toward internet recruitment, reaching out to potential candidates through your personal network is still used today for specialized positions like an HR manager. Alex, the CEO, reached out to Rebecca to invite her for an interview using his knowledge of his network and knowing which people have HR experience. Now they skipped step 2, 3, and we're going to go to step 4. Employment interview, the most common step in the selection process, as a formal face-to-face interview is almost always conducted when hiring a new employee. Rebecca comes into WEC for the interview with both the CEO Alex and the HR specialist Selena. Step 5, the realistic job review shows the potential client the work environment that he or she will be working in, as well as the general requirements that will be asked of them. When Alex takes Rebecca on a tour of the organization, he knows what environment she will be working in. Alex also gives Rebecca a general description of activities and requirements of the HR manager position. And finally, step 6, the verification of references. After conducting an interview, organizations will ask potential candidates for references to ensure that what it shows on their resume and how they describe themselves is accurate. So now to question 2. Imagine that you're a consultant for the WEC, provide the company with a better selection process for the HR manager position. So we said WEC only used 4 steps out of the total 8 steps in the selection process. Even though not each step necessarily is useful to each company, WEC could still improve its selection process. By adding employment tests to the selection process, the organization can test the actual knowledge of the candidate through a wide array of tests, from personality tests, performance tests, and integrity tests. WEC could use ability tests and knowledge tests to ensure Rebecca has the required knowledge to perform well as a major HR manager in the organization. Question 3, as Connor mentioned earlier, there's behavioral questions and situational questions. Behavioral questions are based on the candidate's past experience and past work. So the first behavioral question: when working as an HR manager for a retail company, how did you deal with the employees who started demonstrating lower performances at work, even though they had been with the company for a long period of time? The second question could be, when working as an HR manager for a retail company, how would you manage a delicate situation between 2 employees who were experiencing conflict on the same project? Now onto the situational question. They want to see how would Rebecca react or manage a situation at their future HR managing position. So the first question, in regards to a reward system based on deliverables, how would you deal with a situation where 2 employees put in the same amount of efforts and time at work, but one is more efficient than the other? The more efficient employee gets rewarded and the other does not. The least performing employee complains that it is not fair for the other to get rewarded and not him, since they both work the same amount. And the second situational question Alex could ask Rebecca is, as a software company, in regards to health and safety at work, one of WEC's software technicians complains that his monitor at work is damaging his eyes for staying in front of the computer too long and wishes to get a new monitor. How would you deal with such a situation, and what procedure would you use? Finally, with question 4, should Alex and Selena hire Rebecca? We believe Alex should not be hiring Rebecca for the following reasons. In this situation, it seems as if Alex only met Rebecca once at a non-formal event. WEC did not complete any background check on Rebecca, and she was not referred by anyone. Alex does not really know who he's hiring, besides knowing she has worked her way up to an HR managing position in a retail store company. When Rebecca received the job description paper, she mentioned that she had never done most of the tasks described for the future position as an HR manager. Even though she has a lot of experience in human resources management, she comes from the retail sector and not from the software industry, in addition to having no experience in tasks described in the job description. And finally, she does not even know anything about the company. It seems as if she went to the interview out of curiosity, but not knowing what WC is or any of the company's values. As an HR manager, that should be one of the most important aspects of the job since you represent management towards the rest of the employees. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation.